Hello, class. My name is Ryan Abernathy, and this is my forecast in the future of a global issue. So, my current event that I chose was everything that's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Several years ago, Ukraine was a part of Russia and became independent. Russia disliked that and wants to take Ukraine back. They saw that Ukraine was kind of their own country, and they didn't really rely on anybody else, and especially Russia. Over the past years, Ukraine has been attempting to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is better known as NATO. Russia does not want them to join because they dislike Westernization and they believe that NATO will influence Ukraine, which it already has. The United States gave Ukraine a heads up on Russia attacking them, but they did not react to that. They just kind of shrugged it off and said that that wasn't really going to happen. Vladimir Putin, which is the president for Russia, he sent his military troops to the border and attacked Ukraine. Russia wants to take over Ukraine to be near the NATO allies. And I have a quote that says Putin said he views the prospect of Ukraine joining the Western military alliance a hostile act. So, citizen in Ukraine has to hide in safe places. Many people have died from the war, um, as we already like where we're at now. This jeopardizes Ukraine and could potentially be a start of World War III. Excuse me. So, America's President Joe Biden has deployed his military troops at the border of NATO allies to be ready if or when Russia takes over Ukraine. Um, he did that just because if Russia did take over Ukraine, he wanted his troops to be ready if they were wanting to invade the other NATO allies. Um, so I have a quote that says the current conflict has severely strained US-Russia relations and increased the risk of a wider European conflict. Tensions are likely to increase between Russia and neighboring NATO member countries that would likely involve the United States due to aligned security commitments. So for the larger global issue, I chose inflation and poverty. So Russia is a big producer of natural gas and oil in the world. They're also the biggest wheat supplier to Europe and I believe also many other countries. But ever since the war started with Russia and Ukraine, the gas and oil prices have increased, as you all know. And it's just getting harder for to afford for gas. Let's see. The international trade map shows how different countries export resources to different countries, making them become a dependent country. Also, COVID-19 has also made an impact on the world that it has implemented a supply shortage, which is causing inflation throughout the world. So the Labor Department said Thursday that consumers' prices jumped 7.5 last month compared with a year earlier, the steepest year-over-year increases since February 1982. So where we're at right now is where we were in 1982. So since inflation has increased over the past year, it is becoming more difficult for people to afford resources. This will increase the minimum wage rate, um, which they're kind of working on that now, where they're kind of trying to raise minimum wage rate because of inflation, and it's becoming more harder to purchase goods and stuff. Um, I have a quote that says, "Only the available for the super rich, for those that can afford it, are we heading to the new eugenic? Only those that are able to afford it, able to be the super race of the future." So, with that being said, the wealthier people have I guess, the money to spend for all this stuff. They don't really have to worry about gas and oil and all that stuff like people do. This is causing more people to fall into poverty and having more homeless people. Only the wealthy people can have the best things, and inflation does not affect them. They will get the best that they can get. So, the theoretical explanation is a transformationalist perspective best explains a global issue and current events because there are things that are always changing around the world, and this will always be affecting other countries, such as Russia and Ukraine, for example. It's kind of affecting everybody else, although we're not fighting with them. So many leaders take role of their country and want to try and change their country for the better. Let's see. Sidney Brown explains that the national government is changing, and it's because the world is changing. And the world revolves around change, and that is how we are here today. I mean, globalization is going to change no matter what. Like it's always there's always going to be change throughout the world. So the future forecast, if things were to continue how they are now without any sudden change, I believe that the world would have a difficult time with inflation. Where we were in 1982, if you look at the results for that, after a couple years after 1982, inflation decreased, but it didn't decrease drastically. So I don't see that happening anytime soon either. It would almost take over the world and leave the wealthy citizens to be able to afford resources such as housing and land and stuff. The National Institute's autumn 2021 Global Economic Outlook predicted that annual US PCE inflation would rise from 1.2% in the fourth quarter of last year to 5.1% this year and moderate to 2.3% in the fourth quarter of 2022. In the next 5 to 10 years, I believe that inflation will be a problem and would take some time to decrease, like I said before. I believe that we are at our peak. Where we are at this point right now is where we were in 1982. The inflation rate was 7.9%. Maybe in 40 years, we will repeat history again, but I mean, that's where we were from 1982 from now. So since there is a war with Russia, it is more difficult to trade for oil and other supplies to different countries. So just going on to my future forecast, if things were to stay the way they are now, I believe that the world would have a difficult time with people going into poverty. Due from the inflation, many people could not be able to afford the prices for goods and resources. Um, and I have a quote that says, Projections by the World Data Lab's World Poverty Clock suggest that by 2030, there will be 359 million people living in extreme poverty in today's fragile states, representing 63% of the world's poor. So as of now, the most population from poverty are the Nigeria and the DRC. So the world needs to focus more on the fragile states. However, people cannot help that they have the same income, but the cost of supply increases. And just gonna keep going on with my future forecast. So if things do not change now, I believe that the world will be suffering from homelessness and have a difficult time trying to assist the homeless. I have a quote that says, "If housing costs continues to inflate indefinitely, we can expect the prospect of owning a home to become increasingly closed off to all but the very wealthy. And as the price of housing generates additional upward pressure on rents, we can expect to see corresponding increases in homelessness." So I believe because of inflation, it's causing people into poverty and is cannot afford their house. This is causing them to go homeless and is increasing throughout the United States. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I believe that there will be more homelessness unless they lower the inflation rate and or fix the minimum wage rate. Because, like I said, people are losing their houses and stuff because they can't afford it anymore. So, going on my future forecast, as we can see, the cause of Russia war can actually be bad for the economy. It has caused inflation, and that will push more people into poverty. Increasing inflation can also make a lot of people not afford for their houses and cause them to become homeless. More people would need to apply for additional financial assistance from the government. The coronavirus pandemic has put a hold on resources and workers since 2019, and that is a reason why the resources are becoming so expensive because of how difficult it is to receive them. I mean, it's a supply and demand. So inflation typically increases coming out of downturns as demand outpaces supply early in the recovery, but this tendency has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 impacts. Demand for many goods dropped in 2020 and remained lower into 2021 as further waves of COVID cases led to the government restrictions on consumer behavior. So my theoretical support, I believe that hyper-globalist perspective can help to explain my prediction because all countries are one globalization, and we all support each other in some way. because of the trade goods that we do. Many countries exchange goods and money for resources. The reason why they trade resources is because one country needs what the other country can provide. So if one country has, they can have excessively too much, like they can make and create a lot of like oil, for example, for Russia, and they can transport it to many different countries around the world. For example, America gets its supply from China, and Europe gets their supply from Russia. All countries cannot be independent because we need resources in order to survive. It also works in hand where people are located, like Russia, are on top of a bunch of oil, and they can provide oil for the rest of the world. So I'm just going to keep going on for my theoretical support. The hyper-globalist perspective explains how many countries work as one society. Economies become interdependent as the nation states themselves become significantly less important. They may individual countries become one global society. Let's see. Modernization theory is a theory that all countries follow a similar path of development to success. With assistance, smaller countries can become like a bigger country. And both of these theories help break down the prediction of the current and global event because all countries will always be changing. Things will happen, and it is how we all react about it together. I believe that these theories can help describe how all countries work together to survive and spend different resources to countries. So my conclusion, my thoughts on what I believe should change is the presidency time span because I believe that presidents should only have four. Oh, you know how like they have 4 years in their office, but I believe that it should be longer, maybe like 10 years, for example. If we have presidency in the office longer than 4 years, I believe that each country would have the same mindset. Instead of the citizens of each country are always changing their way to follow the president's decision. If we had fewer presidents in the office, we could stick to one idea with the country for at least a decade, because I feel like all the citizens around the world are always changing their mind or not changing their mind. They're always changing the leader's direction, basically. If each country keeps their president for 10 years, we can all agree to one decision for 10 years until the next president. I believe that we have so many presidents cycling in and out of being in charge of the country. It seems that every president wants to leave their mark some way. And the thing about having different presidents after every 4 years is hard for the citizens to try and adjust their ways. Again, because the new president wants to do something different. I believe that is one reason why Russia is in war with the Ukraine. And the difficult thing about keeping one presidency after 10 years, some presidents want to take over all the countries and keep the resources to themselves. Since this is a president that wants to try and take over different countries, it is affecting all of the other countries because of the resources. America are also spending their funds on being prepared for war with Russia if they get through Ukraine and want to take over a NATO country. Since Russia is at war, it is causing the inflation, poverty, and homelessness. It all came down to one president that made these decisions. And these are my references. That is all. Thank you.